Oh.
Hey, so we're going to record this next stage of having a look at understanding myths, continuity, and exploring the image of God. And we'll be doing that in the context of understanding the Old Testament, understanding more about how they saw different spirits, idols, and God, who we call God now, and how they would have understood him. So I'm going to share my screen as I've done before. And here we go. Oops, I pressed the wrong sequence of buttons there. Now we'll press the right sequence of buttons this time. And hopefully you can see that. And I will also remind you of this book that I mentioned last week that I've been reading some more of. So this one here, I think is brilliant, but it's you know, it's an examination, an exploration of the Bible in relationship to the culture of the time, and it's therefore more of an academic book, but it's written very well and it's very accessible. This one here is fiction based upon the life of Elijah. And I have to say that I found it really good. And if you want to read some fiction that actually brings this story alive, it's pretty good. I mean, the guy who wrote it is obviously, taking a bit of license with the story. But nevertheless, it actually communicates something of the feeling of what was going on. And you get into the kind of mind of some of the challenges that Elijah was experiencing for himself in the process of being, this extraordinary prophet as he was, and bringing the presence of God to the people around him. So I really recommend that. If you can find it in various good bookshops, he said. So go and have a look. If you want a guide or a link to it, I'll send you the details, but there it is. So last week, you may remember we had a look at this picture, which is of how they saw the heavens and the earth and the structure of things. And, we had a little conversation about that, and how there was this kind of sort of flat earth with this sort of arc of heaven above it. And somehow or another, they were trying to make sense of what that world was all about. And part of the reason for having lots of different deities was so that they could try to make sense of what was going on around them, particularly the things like, the stars and the planets and the moons, but also things like, why do you have storms and why do things grow and die and all that kind of stuff? Because it was quite tricky for them to get their heads around. They needed an explanation, but what they also were looking for was some means of handling the challenges that were going on in the way life was led. And, if your crop was dependent upon something happening, if you were reliant upon things going on, there was always this fear that somehow or another the world would descend into chaos. And so I'm just doing a quick reminder of all of that, and how this was a picture of the chaos monster as they saw, and people like the gods were seen very much in kind of human form. They kind of looked like a kind of superhuman who were managing to control these forces that seemed to be dangerously out of control as far as the people were concerned. And so this conflict that was going on between kind of order and chaos was very common. And then we compared it to saying that, things in our modern life can actually have characteristics that can be similar to that. And then, it isn't something that we've lost, is that fear of sort of a chaotic life. And then we looked at a couple of people from the passages we started reading in 1 Kings 16. And we looked at Omri, who built various shrines and so on, and had set up idols, provoked the anger of the Lord with setting up their worthless idols, and how Ahab continued that and took it even further. by setting up idols, not just to Asherah, which were the Asherah poles, but also particularly to Baal. And because he married a wife, Jezebel, who is a name that we associate with all the things that lead us astray, if you like. And she came from what is modern day Lebanon, which then was called Phoenicia, and the city in it was Sidon, and so they were called the Sidonians. So this is just a quick recap. I don't know if this is helpful for people, just to remind you.
Yeah,
we did. And we looked at various locations. This is where Phoenicia is, and Sidon is up here. The main power was Aram, and Samaria, which is where lots of things happened. Jericho down the bottom here, and of course the area of Judah right down in the south. And we just had a look at Asherah poles and going up to a high place of sacrifice, there being one in modern day Jordan, just above Petra, and how the statue of Baal will be taken up and plonked in there so that the worship would go on in that high place. So now we're coming to looking at particularly at a bit more of this idea of continuity and how people understood these idols, these images. The images of Baal looked like these kind of things. And what I'd like you to do is just tell me, what do they look like? What does the thoughts sort of strike in your mind about these kind of images? What kind of person would Baal be, do you think?
It's the devil.
Why do you say that?
Because he looks like what we think the devil looks like. And I mean, you think it should be red, that top picture on the left, with his horn.
What makes you say that looks like the devil? What are the characteristics?
The horns, the look of mischief and trouble, and yeah, he's carrying. Is it a sword he's carrying there? Is it a sword in his right hand?
This one here you're looking at.
Yeah, is that a sword?
No, that's a child.
Is it? It looks like the hilt of a sword.
Yeah. Well, there's the head of the child there.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah. The child's legs.
Oh, the legs. Okay, yeah. It just looks a frightening image. I mean, I don't think I want to pray for help. It looks, So
which way round was it, Ron, do you think? Do you think this came before our pictures of the devil or after the pictures of the devil?
After. This came before, didn't it?
Yeah, this is well before we have pictures of the devil.
Yeah.
So could you imagine that this might have been a bit of an inspiration for pictures of the devil?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Okay. So that's helpful. What else are you noticing about these images and the idea that the Baal is somehow associated with storms and lightning and stuff? That picture in the background. So tell me what else you're noticing on any of these images. These are all cast statues or idols or images that came from ancient Mesopotamia.
It looks a bit male, doesn't it?
Yes, although is this male or female? And
Well,
holding a baby? Holding a baby?
Well, yeah, I guess.
He looks quite strong and powerful on the stone. Or is it
is the baby breastfeeding, or is it? I mean,
could be, although we don't really know. It might be,
because Baal could be perhaps female as well.
Yeah.
So why? What characteristics? What would therefore that image be all about? I mean, can you think of things in the natural world that would be
Fertility.
the responsibility of an idol, of a god, a deity that looked like that?
Fertility.
So Jen?
Fertility.
Yeah, it kind of looks as though fertility was quite, something that they would instigate. Anything else?
Mm.
The weather in some form, lightning.
Yeah, that absolutely. Some sort of thing to do with the weather from the lightning. Think about fertility. What about fertility that wasn't just of animals? What about the crops?
Because on that picture on the right, the carving, is that a tree he's holding on these? In these
Yeah, that's the growing crop. Yeah.
And what's that to the left of it? Is that looks like there's a third hand on top of a man sitting on a rock or something?
Oh, this one here.
That.
This thing here.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite hard to see what that is. It could be a small figure. So in other words, this could be the big god, and this could be the picture of a man.
And above it, is that his belt or?
Well, there's definitely a sword here.
Sword, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's or it could be, it looks a bit like a hand, but actually there's feet coming out the bottom here and a kind of bottom of a tunic there. So it's a little uncertain, but this looks like this is a picture of the waves here.
Yeah.
So something about water. Anything else you're noticing about that?
Back to that original picture portrayal we were talking about, it just keeps striking me that the texture of the chest is like a serpent. It sort of reminds me of a serpent-like scales. And,
Right. Yeah. It could be that. Well, these pieces here you're thinking of?
No, I was thinking more of the other image.
Oh, this one here.
Where
Yes.
Across the chest. It's
across the chest.
Yeah.
So is that a club he's holding in his right hand on the carving?
There's a kind of there's something here that's reaching right up into the heavenly shape. There, like a heavenly shape above his head.
Yeah.
And this is some kind of rod or tool or something that's going right up into the top here.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not just, there's lots of different images. So I thought we'd actually start with this and in our this part, moving on to part 2 of what we were talking about last week, I wanted to bring us to this image here, which is of a storm, which is associated with Baal. Everything in this picture is associated with Baal. So what are the characteristics of something like this?
Well, it's power, isn't it? It's
yeah,
and strength. And I mean, and again, that first image of the holding the child, it's a very powerful image, isn't it?
It is. So what else is associated with the storm? What else do you get with the storm?
Rain.
Yeah, you get rain. So what's the significance of rain?
No, they need the water for life.
Yeah, it brings life. It feeds crops. What else do you get when you have a storm?
Wind.
Yeah, you get wind. You get power blowing around, which would be quite hard to understand. What else?
Electricity.
Sorry?
Electricity.
Electricity. Yeah, and that's really important because I don't suppose they'd have known it like this, but they'd have probably connected it because pretty well all the nitrogen that's in the soil that makes plants grow well is actually what's known as fixed out of the atmosphere by lightning. It's the natural way of getting nitrogen out of the air into the soil so that plants can be nourished is caused by lightning. And something like, it's also produced by, some kinds of root nodules on quite a lot of things like vegetables, beans and things. But something like more than 50% of the nitrogen in the soil is what's known as fixed from the air. Rain falls on the ground that brings the fertility to the ground. So they would, although they might not have known the science of it, they'd have known the effect of it.
Mm.
So if we go on to explore this idea of continuity, can you see that in that picture, those images of Baal, any similarities between that storm and the images? Can you see any similarities between the storm and the images?
Power is the word that comes
Yeah.
to me.
I mean, if you let a bull out, how would it behave?
Powerful, aggressive way, potentially.
Yeah. And what do you expect a bull to do in a field full of cows?
Fertilize.
Mountain.
Exactly. So can you sort of kind of see some connections here that are going on in this kind of imagery? So the idea of continuity is quite hard for us to get our head around it, but it's really worth pursuing. So if I just shrink that picture down, a myth, an understanding of continuity is a way of thinking about reality that is different from the way we have been brought up and shaped in Western thought. The way we think doesn't work like this. So it's hard to get your head into the way they thought in ancient Mesopotamia. And the key idea behind that is what's known as continuity. And continuity is this. It's that all things that exist are part of each other. If you get a picture of the world that's that kind of big circle, is inside that circle and is part of each other. There are no fundamental distinctions between the three realms that we see and think of as separated out, because we think of them being broken up and separated, which is the heavenly realm of deities, humanity, and nature as being separate things. But they thought of them as being all part of the same pot. And so gods are humans and natural forces. The presence of that god of Baal can look and be a human, can be nature as well. And nature can be divine as well. So therefore they can cross over in either direction. And divinity has very much human characteristics. So it's seen as being like human behavior. And humanity is divine and is one with the nature as well. Now, it's quite hard to get your head around that. But if you start thinking about it like that, you'll start to get the understanding of it. Because if you have thunder and lightning are very similar to things like the bull. And actually, thunder and lightning, when Baal is around, Baal manifests as a storm with thunder and lightning and rainfall and the fertility that flows out of it. The presence of Baal is the storm. It isn't as though he's making it happen. He is the storm.
That's how they saw it.
That's how they saw it. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
So the point is that things that look or sound the same are the same. And if the idol is like Baal, it is Baal. And what is done to the idol is therefore done to Baal. I mean, you still find this kind of thing in some cultures where they don't want you to take a photograph of them. Because if you've got a photograph of them, you've got an image of them, it looks like them. And if you damage that photograph, they will feel the pain. So Baal, in this case, is like the storm. It's potent, life-giving, impetuous, and destructive. Therefore, he is the storm. And what is done to Baal, like I just said, is done to the storm. And what is done to the storm is done to Baal. So if you have an idol, can you get the idea now that if you've got an idol, and if you want that God to do what you'd like that God to do, and you want to influence it, you feed the idol. You take it things that actually show it, that you are feeding it. And because it has those characteristics of being able to pick up what's going on in humanness, it goes and is connected straight to that deity.
So if you
go
look
on.
at something like voodoo, where they stick pins in images, is
Yes.
that they're trying to damage or hurt the person or something?
That's exactly the same idea, and it's
Yeah.
still part of continuity.
Yeah.
It goes right back to this time. And you've only got to look at some New Ageist activity as well, and you'll see signs of this understanding as well. You know, that you go and you gain benefit, you gain energy from the trees or from nature around you. Now, we know that, you know, that the right environment can give us energy, but they will see it as being something that is actually directly connecting with a deity that is embedded in nature, that is affecting us as humans.
So is tree hugging come into this?
Tree hugging is absolutely part of that. Yes, it depends upon how you hug them, Ron, really. But you know, the principle you're raising is exactly the point there.
Yeah.
Does this go back to the question though, without wanting to sort of rake up all the that horse film and everything? If any one of us was to hug a tree, would that be wrong? Because if you're feeling that this tree was created by God, it's you know, we're not saying, we're not praying or whatever from the tree. I don't know. Is tree hugging wrong?
Well, look, I mean, the things like, you know, it's the key thing about it is that is your worship, is your relationship with Jesus, who is pointing to God, or is it associated with gaining your energy or whatever through some kind of interaction or through some kind of forces that are coming through this horse or this tree? That's the point, is that where is your God? Who is your God? Now, if we were to extend and take that sort of picture on a bit further to something like a river, you know, can you imagine walking down to the stream each day? Well, a stream, how does that feel? Does it feel as though it's got, what does a stream communicate to you? What do you think of when you go and sort of see a stream? Is it just, oh, there's a nice little stream?
It's life, isn't it?
Life, yeah, I was going to say it's life, yeah.
Living water to refresh us and the rest of it.
Yeah. And does it appear to have life within it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to make sure that if you lived in an area where that stream could dry up, which we know streams do, what do you think you might do to encourage it not to dry up?
Pray.
To whom?
The stream god.
Okay. So what would you do to pray to the stream god?
What are you going back
Really?
to ancient Near East now, Paul? You're not talking about now.
No, I know, but I know I'm not talking about now. I think yes.
You're not
I
asking
hope
us what we're
everybody's
doing now.
realised that. I'm just trying to give you the impression that, you know, if you lived in the ancient world and you were dependent upon that stream, and you wanted to make that stream not dry up, what would you do? You said pray, but who would you pray to?
The stream god.
Okay, so how do you pray to a stream god?
You create an idol or something, I suppose, that you have. I don't know. Do they?
Yeah, you're right, Alison. You exactly right. You get a chunk of wood, and you make it look like a person that you could imagine inhabiting a stream with long flowy hair, for example, and a kind of, and a kind of body that looks a bit like a fish. Yeah. And what you do then is you go and give it nice things to eat. And the difficulty is that there were so many of these. For example, if you then walk down to the stream and you walked, and this is a stream in Jordan, and you can see how, you can just imagine how that could dry up. You can see the banks, you can see the fertility around it and some of the trees. Now, can you imagine you've got a tree there that's bearing fruit that you really want to fruit this autumn, so that you've got food for the bad months? What do you do to make sure that tree fruits?
You make an idol
the
of
water.
Yeah, well, the thing about it is that you can end up with a whole load of little idols that need venerating every time you go out for a walk. And it wasn't uncommon for a village to have a whole load of idols. And you remember in the Bible, you keep on coming across the household idols. And if you come across that, they'll have a little set of 5 or 6 different idols, one for this river, one for Baal, one for the sun and the moon, one for the trees, because you need them all. Otherwise, it ain't going to be too good. So the key thing about this picture is that all things that exist are physically and spiritually part of one another. There's no distinction between you and a deity and a tree.
That does sound very New Agey, doesn't it?
Isn't Hinduism like this? They have all different gods, Lord Shiva, and all for different.
Yes,
types.
it is. It is very much like this, Ron.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's a great advantage, surely, for God to say, I am the only God, because you don't have to worry about all these tens of different gods to have to. You've only got one God you've got to look after, because he controls absolutely everything. The storms, the water, the light, the shine, the dee-da-da-da-do. One God, one prayer, one center of control.
Absolutely
very attractive proposition, God.
Yeah,
it is, because it can really simplify life. But if you live in a world where everybody around you says, if you don't do this bit when you go past the river, and it's a bit like, I don't know how many Christians who cross their who cross their fingers, don't walk under ladders, will try to go out of the same door that they came in on. Various other things.
Say touch wood.
Yeah. It's because it surrounds it surrounds the people with that culture. It's dramatically, as you say, simplifies life only having one God. But if everybody else around you says there's quite a lot of them, it kind of makes sense.
Yes, and I guess if you're the family that doesn't support Baal and suddenly there are no storms, there is no rain, there are no crops, it's all your fault.
Yes.
For going against Baal, you family are the one who's causing all this trouble.
yeah.
Absolutely right. Shall I just read you? Actually, thank you for raising that, because I'll just read you a little bit of Yeah. So when Ahab meets Elijah, bearing in mind that Elijah has been saying there's only one God and you don't need to do all of this stuff, when he meets Ahab, when Ahab saw him, he exclaimed, "So, is it really you, you troublemaker of Israel, the one who stopped it raining?"
Mhm. There you go.
Aha! So it's exactly what you said, James.
Yes.
And he replies, "I haven't made any trouble for Israel," Elijah says. "You and your family are the troublemakers."
Oh. I hope he's got a bigger sword.
But it's interesting that in our prayer time this morning, not this morning, earlier on this evening, we saw Jesus wanting to give us his peace, because this is making me feel very anxious. I mean, I could imagine if I lived at that time, I would have no peace, because I would think, oh my goodness, I forgot to please that God, and then I didn't. And did I do my prayer right? And did I carve my idol in the right way? Did I? And you would never ever know whether you've satisfied that God. And yet tonight, Jesus is saying, I want to give you peace. And we have peace because we're in a relationship with God. And that's all that's needed.
And we've got the knowledge that we don't actually have any control over these things. The fact that we didn't pray to an idol about the rain, not coming, and this, is all very it's sort of your ego, isn't it? It's very egotistical having all the idols, because it's all about, well, if we don't do it, that's going to happen. As if we have that control. We know it's not down to us. Thank goodness, it's down to someone with much more power, who loves us all. So that's handy.
Yeah. The thing about it is you've only got to think, as we mentioned earlier on, when we have a crisis, how do people respond? When there's no food on the shelves, when there's no fuel in the garages, when we're terrified. Yeah, we're terrified of catching a disease. It's how do we respond? What do people turn to? And the moment, that's quite interesting to see how that reaction occurs. And so shall we have a look then at an alternative way of seeing all of this, which is what James alluded to earlier on? Let's go right back to Genesis. So would somebody like to read this passage from Genesis chapter 1?
Yeah, I'll do it. So then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. Then God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And I've given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life. And this is what has happened. Then God looked over all he had made and saw it was very good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the sixth day.
Thank you.
I love the word scurry along the ground. That's my new.
Yes, I love the creatures that scurry along the ground. It's just lovely. It's a lovely, lovely image. So what do you notice about that story by comparison to the way the surrounding cultures would have seen their deities? What are the differences?
Well, God made us in his image, and so everything else is made in a sort of more of a materialistic thing.
Yes, you're right. So instead of the idol being made to look like humans, God is making humans to look like him.
Him, yeah.
Mm.
Good, good. Well spotted, Alison. Anything else you're noticing?
God alone is the creator. Everything is from him.
Right, yeah. So in other words, the things didn't exist to begin with, and then the gods, are kind of in control of it. They're kind of emanation is the other way around. Anything else you're noticing?
He said that he's provided food for for this, and so he's created a balance of independency one upon another, which goes back to what we're saying. The other said we're all related.
Right, they're all interrelated, but what there's more, bit more to it than that.
Yeah.
What else are you spotting?
He's passed on the reign to humans over the planets to look after it.
Yes. So who is looking after this stuff now?
We are.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? What else are you noticing?
There is dignity in the relationship between God and human beings. When we're not, everything is not all mixed up. There's a separation, but he's honoring us with this responsibility.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And what do we mean by being made in his image? What does that mean? What do they mean? Does it mean to say that, God looks like Ron?
Poor chap.
He does. He does. He looks like all of us.
So a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a body. Yeah, and a brain to think and creativity. Yeah.
So in being something like being in the image of, what is the image of? What does that kind of imply?
Similar to.
Yeah, go on. Any more? I mean, what is God like?
Us.
God.
Yeah, hang on a minute. If we so if we're created, so what does it say in verse 26 at the beginning?
Let's just make human beings in our image to be like us. Plural.
Good. Stop there. To be like us.
Yeah.
What's that?
Have the characteristics of?
Yeah, go on then.
He's, as somebody else said, creative, loving, caring, all of those things. He wants us to be in that image of him.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it's just, righteous, actually empowered, capable of managing this world. Go on.
Let's just kick something in here. What is the original meaning of the word God? Because we talk about God as God, but then there are these other gods, these idols. So what is actual God? Is that a plural for a deity, or?
This word here, the God word here, is given a capital G because it is the Yahweh of the Hebrew God. So right. that's the one God here. Yeah. As opposed to one of the gods, one of the deities. Kate's going to busily look up our interlinear now.
It's an interesting question, though, isn't it?
It is an interesting question, but there is a distinction made between them in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So anything else you're noticing about this that you want to raise? It's a really, really important passage, this is. We're going to have a look at some more of it in a minute.
So he's taken the seed-bearing plants throughout the earth and all fruit trees for your food. Doesn't mention animals.
No. No. So the authority is given to man. That's the interesting thing about it is. And remember, God is a God of person of authority as well. Authority and power.
Yeah, and it is interesting that God originally gives us vegetables to eat.
Mm.
Doesn't sound like we're supposed to kill things in this paradise scenario.
I know this is quite a sort of fairly fundamental question, but how does this all set with the theory of evolution?
Okay.
You know, I mean,
I
as a Christian, I firmly and honestly believe that God made man and God created all things. So I can see that, and I understand that, and I believe that. But I think this picture here is allegorical and all those things, and therefore it's an interesting question from the non-Christian friends of mine who say it's all a load of rubbish, because evolution came along and all we did was develop, and then we developed to a point where we had lots of gods, and then we decided, or some people in the Middle East decided that they'll have one God, and then it developed from there. And then Jesus came along, and obviously that was a fundamental change. Jesus was the change. But before that, it was, that's how they see it.
And it's not an unreasonable way of seeing it.
It isn't an unreasonable way.
It's a logical way, and it hangs together. This is why, though, this passage, I think you are right to say this is an allegorical passage. It is meant to give us a picture of the reasoning behind it. Yeah. And it is not to deny evolution and everything else that goes on before that. Mm-hmm. That's how I see it anyway. I know there's Christians who would say that it's otherwise, and I understand that point of view. But I'm with you, James, is that I see this as an allegory. But the important point is this is showing God's intent. This is about the nature of who God is and what his intent and purpose was in the creation. And that's the revelation of Scripture in this environment. And it's also giving us a clue about the nature and character of the Creator God. And you notice at the beginning, we talk about this being the one God. But verse 26 again, read verse 26 again, Ron, just that first sentence.
So then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us.
So God didn't say, let me make human beings in my image.
Yeah, plural.
Yeah.
So he's talking
who
about...
Who is the us there?
The Holy Trinity, presumably.
Right.
Right or wrong?
Yes.
This is a what do you think moment, Paul?
It is a this is what you think moment, but you're doing very well, everybody. You're doing really well with this because you're coming out with some good thoughts here. So all of that, what do you think is paying off now, which is great. So I'm conscious of time, so I want to summarize this with this picture, which is comparing the ancient Near East culture, which is Mesopotamia, with the God of the Bible. And I've got these two big circles again. And let's just have a look at the culture where they've got many gods with human characteristics. And humanity in their world has relatively little value. They're only of value except that they serve the gods. And the individuality is pretty well irrelevant. That's why, because humans don't have much value, individuality is irrelevant, therefore child sacrifices, well, so what?
Yeah.
Because if that's all that's going on, it doesn't really matter. You're only there to serve the gods, because if you don't serve the gods won't perform and you'll die anyway. And creation, the creation stories of the ancient world tend to arise from conflicts between the gods. The gods fought each other, and out of those conflicts came the earth, came the creation. We'll look at this some more before we go to the British Museum, but there's a brilliant text in the British Museum that describes the creation of the earth based upon the conflict between two of the gods. And that's in the British Museum, and it's brilliant because it came out, it was written around the same sort of time as a big chunk of the Bible. So we're going to go and have a look at that. The interesting thing is that if you've got lots of gods, you've got lots of different ethical frameworks, because each god defines the way you should behave. Can you imagine that that's the case?
Would they have different ethics to each other? So you please one. Yeah.
You think about if the gods have human characteristics, do all of us have the same ethics?
No.
So
I think it's like now, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
We're not carving them, but we're certainly living by them.
You're absolutely right, Bex, because actually we see that happening now, because ethics are the ethics as you define them to be, or that group of you define them to be. And therefore, the other thing is that if you want to influence the gods, magic and ritual really work. Because if you want the god to perform in the way you want them to, you go and demonstrate to them how you want them to perform. So that they get the idea. Now, that leads to a very interesting thing when you want to make sure that fertility works and that the gods get on and make it so that your cows will reproduce. What do you do to demonstrate to them how to do that?
Through sacrifice?
Nope. You go and have sex in the temple.
And nobody wanted to answer that question. That's why there was
noticeably no. Everybody was avoiding the shrine prostitutes, which you find throughout the Bible, and you even find at the same time as Jesus. That's why they had prostitutes in the temples, because it was a way of you demonstrating to the god what you expected them to do.
They do.
Why couldn't you take your wife and have sex there? Why did you have to go to a prostitute?
Well, I don't know, but it probably was quite a good excuse, Jones.
Oh, right. Okay.
No, wasn't it that the prostitute hanged out? Sorry, I can't find the right word. In the temple, and that you were reenacting fertility with the prostitute as if you were having sex with the god, I think.
Absolutely right, Kate.
And they still do that in Hinduism. So the Dalits, who are the lowest caste Hindus, Indians, can easily find themselves, that's their job.
Well, the blokes as well?
No, the girls, young girls. Yeah.
So you can kind of see where all this comes from now, can't you? Now, the God of the Bible, we have a different picture because we have one God now, but that God is outside the system. That's the key difference. And once you've got one God, do you notice in that passage how high a view God had of humanity? He saw humanity as being like God. He had the characteristics of being highly valued, and they were not needed to serve God. Do you notice there was no requirement for service in there? And in the 10 Commandments, it is you honor the God and you serve him, but you're not required to keep making sacrifices. Sacrifice came later. And therefore individuality is relevant.
Sorry, you say sacrifice came later. Why did sacrifice came later?
It came later when they were effectively emulating the other countries around them. And so therefore it was actually adopted as a means of getting them right with God. When mankind was created, it didn't need to get right with God because he already was.
Okay.
That's the picture, is that it's already right. Creation was an intentional design rather than arising from. And because the God is outside the system, there's one set of ethics that are consistent and constant. And magic and ritual can't really affect that God, because this God who's outside the world is not susceptible to the things that go on in the world.
Get it?
Oops, sorry, I'll go back to that if you like. So just to go through that again, I'll just refill that. Does that all make sense to everybody?
Yeah, it's good picture.
Yeah. And does it help you understand the differences between
Yes.
what's going on? So just to finish off this evening, I'd just like us to read one thing, and then we can explore some more stuff next week. But this is from Genesis chapter 2. Somebody want to just read that to finish us off?
Yep, I don't mind.
Yeah, go on.
The Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. But the Lord God warned him, "You may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you eat its fruit, you are sure to die." Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him." So the Lord God formed from the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would call them, and the man chose a name for each one. He gave names to all the livestock, all the birds of the sky, and all the wild animals. But still there was no helper just right for him. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While the man slept, the Lord God took out one of the man's ribs and closed up the opening. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib, and he brought her to the man. At last, the man exclaimed, "This one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman, because she was taken from man." This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one.
Thank you. So do you notice, and I'm just going to just bring this to a close now around this passage, because I'm just saying, do you notice the high view of mankind that God has, in that he's giving man all these animals, and he's actually saying, you name them. Not only, just think about that, the naming process is giving identity to things, it's giving substance to them. And man is given that authority and place to look after the earth, to tend it, to name it. And he is doing it effectively on behalf of God. And just to remind you of that kind of amazing sort of creation sort of picture of the sort of Michelangelo, and Colossians 3 verse 10. Put on your new nature to be renewed as you learn to know your Creator. As you know your Creator, you will begin to know that he can know you so that you can become like God. Oops, I lost that. I was hoping to have another little phrase there. and it dropped off, I'm sorry to say. And I wanted to just say, you were made to become like God. We are made in his image so that we can be like God. And what's happening with Jesus is he's enabling us to put on that new nature, that nature that we lost, so that we can be renewed as we were designed to be, and that we may learn to know our Creator and to become like him.
Very reassuring.
So I'm going to stop that sharing now. And just to say, I hope you found some of that helpful.
Really, really interesting. Thank you.
And that I didn't hopefully lose too many of you on the way.
No, you just can't help thinking though we've made a right pig's ear of it all, though, haven't we?
Yeah.
I did write an essay on this when we were at WTC, if anyone would like to read it. It's quite readable.
Okay, I'm going to
I really enjoyed those sermons in the church at Stebbing on sex, power, and wealth.
Yes.
As being the three issues that dominate humankind. And it is so true. And just putting it in the context of the many